All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CSEPP KYEM August Wednesday webinar. My name is Alicia Johnson. I'm going to be facilitating this afternoon session on the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, or NERDE. And we're going to be learning from Alison Turner, who is the Senior Economic Development Researcher at Argonne National Laboratory. So let's see if I can make this work. As you know, the Wednesday webinar series was established to provide public information officers and other communications related fields with virtual opportunities. So we do a 1 hour monthly webinar on various topics, and today NERDE is one of those topics. If you would like to suggest other topics or have other ideas, please contact David Davis, and his email is at the end of this slide. Today's topic is about the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer and what that can do for you as an emergency manager and a public information professional. There's 3 key elements of NERDE. It provides informational fact sheet information about the community and about its makeup, so you understand a little bit more about who you're talking with and how to reach them. Gives you a more complete look of the risk of future climate events in your community, and also helps you use, hopefully not lose, but use a laundry list of statistics that are needed for various government grants. So Alison is going to help us understand a little bit more about that. Alison Turner brings over 10 years of experience to Argonne National Labs in working in the realms of economic development. And sorry, I just realized that my secondary screen is covering up the rest of this bio, scale and program impact. She's spent time on the research side at the New Mexico Bureau of Business and Economic Research, and as well as the financial side as a municipal bonds trader for the Bank of New York Mellon. And in practice, working with the North Central New Mexico Economic Development District. So she has a lot of development experience and really is excited to bring this information to us. She has served as the founder and chief executive of Metrics Together, a company focused on data empowerment for local government and non-government offices. She holds bachelor's degrees in anthropology and economics from the University of New Mexico and a master's in statistics from Boston University. She's like my statistics hero because I failed stats the first time I took it. Then I took it 3 more times and I did great. So welcome, Alison. Thank you for sharing information about NERDE. With that, I'm going to turn the screen over to you. You can share your deck, and then at the end, I'll come back. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll make sure Alison is able to answer those at the end.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm gonna statistics because I also failed statistics the first time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just got the internet connection is unstable thing. So if at any time anyone can't hear me or I freeze, put something in the chat and we'll try to get it remedied. As Alicia said, she'll be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, but since we have a pretty small group today, if you do have registration of the NERDE tool, if there's an example of something that you might want to see, just let me know, and we can kind of go through any ideas that you might have. So today we're going to go through a couple of things. I'm going to give a background on the research that we do at Argonne and at the National Economic Research and Resilience Center, which is where the NERDE tool lives. My team there works diligently to make this a living dashboard, to make it as responsive and reactive to the needs on the ground as possible. We'll go through some use cases for which the NERDE was built. We'll go through a little technical demonstration and then we'll open it up for questions. I'm hoping we'll have about 10-15 minutes, maybe even 20 to go through questions. Again, this is a living space. I come from an economic development background. A lot of my team comes from emergency management and resilience offices. So we really have tried to make this as practical and pragmatic of a tool as possible. We would love feedback from you all as you use it or as you think of scenarios for which to kind of utilize the data within NERDE. We'd love to have a chat. So a little background. In 2021, Argonne National Laboratory teamed up with the Economic Development Administration to launch the National Economic Research and Resilience Center. We focus on innovative and transparent economic data access, research, and analysis to support on-the-ground work. This comes in several facets. We obviously, economic development and resilience touch a lot of different sectors. So we focus on industry composition, workforce composition, educational pipelines, housing. Essentially, if you guys are struggling with an issue, we also have a tendency to digest it and kind of chew on a little bit at our office. We have a really great relationship with EDA, and a lot of the tools that we have put together and a lot of the research that we have looked at really kind of works to some of the Economic Development Administration's core principles of enhancing workforce development, looking at equity distribution across the United States, and really focusing on spaces that have gone through some sort of transition, whether that be a natural disaster or whether that be large industry change. We produce quarterly research briefs. Some examples of previous briefs that we've put together are a report on equity and economic development, building resilience, and identifying indicators of economic distress. These are all available on the NERDE site. So as we go through the technical demonstration, we will go through where each of these are housed. If you feel interested in taking a look at them, each of these research briefs also comes with a quarterly webinar that are recorded and available on the site as well. Today, we'll really be diving into our data tools and models. So here at Argonne, we house a lot of the data that hosts the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer, or the NERDE, and provide it for free across the spectrum of data users in the United States. So we really planned the NERDE around every level of technical capacity, every level of kind of psychological capacity. We know that a lot of this work comes with a heavy level of administrative burden. It comes with a heavy level of, if this doesn't get done now, it will, I mean, we understand the stress of the jobs that you all do. And so in putting the NERDE together, we really tried to focus on every piece of that pipeline. The Economic Development Capacity Index is a sister tool. So it is a snapshot of all of the counties in the United States. It gives 53 indicators of economic development capacity, kind of bucketed into 5 capacity indices. So we look at human capital, financial resources, industrial resources, infrastructure, and partnerships across the landscape. We'll go into some of the details of the Economic Development Capacity Index during our NERDE tour, but it's definitely something for you all to check out afterward, as well as you're putting grants together, as you're trying to fight emergencies, as you're trying to put your plans together. These are some really great data tools at your fingertips that you can use. And then the last is our Economic Performance and Government Revenue Index. This is really helpful for recovery. So we put this index together in the early stages of recovery from COVID to really start to look at places whose local government revenues through taxes were being uniquely affected by impacts of the pandemic. And we've seen this tool to be really, really helpful for other natural disasters. So recently we used this for a wildfire mitigation study, looking at impacts of a recent wildfire in an area and how that affected government revenues in the short term. So as I mentioned, we worked really closely with EDA and EDA's partners to come up with some key use cases for the NERDE tool. If you don't have an endpoint, your middle point can get lost somewhere along the way. So the first component, and Alicia mentioned this in her intro, I'm very thankful, is the area fact sheet. So it's a very quick sheet on what's going on in the county, who are the people demographically, who do we need to be kind of particularly concerned about, who do we need to spend some special attention looking at or looking for. We also give a really quick snapshot on workforce and industry. So a really quick space to say, okay, where are we starting? This, as we developed it, really had individuals like board members, like local political or government officials, people who don't have a lot of time. This is the space that you want to start. This is something that you can print out really quickly. You can distribute it along the table before a presentation just to get everyone on the same page before you start the rest of your planning work or the rest of the kind of distribution work that needs to happen within a disaster or within a planning scenario. These quick statistics are also really good to start with when thinking about grant applications that require certain thresholds of demographics. So aging populations, young populations, this is a really good place to start. The next thing that we thought about specifically was disaster recovery. So the Economic Development Administration has disaster grants. We work really closely with FEMA as well. So really thinking about how we can use data in order to better prepare our local governments, our local agencies, our local emergency managers for the future. So looking at risk and resilience, using some of our climate projections. This starts to blend in other tools within the Argonne space. So because we do so much collaborative work across the federal government, we have quite a few tools that provide really informed data around climate change impact. And we pipe that in to the NERDE. So this links to our Climber tool, which is our climate risk and resilience portal. If you have more or questions about the data that feeds this, we have links that go straight to the Climber portal and really get involved. We work very, very closely with those researchers on climate projections, on climate impact studies, and things like that. This also helps with disaster summaries. So we list all of the FEMA declared disasters on the NERDE site so that you have a quick kind of snapshot of the FEMA declared space within your area, and have kind of a better pulse on what's going on. The last space, and this one unfortunately is near and dear to my heart. I spent a long time not fighting, waiting, I guess, through the grant application space and the grant administration space. For those of you who are familiar with the Economic Development Administration's grants process, they do have eligibility requirements that align to 24-month unemployment and per capita income. They also have some special requirements or special avenues for specific grants. We tried to make all of that really tangible in our distress statistics generator. So this, by color coding, you can see where you fall within those EDA designated thresholds. The lightest, or kind of the yellow, is you're just eligible. You get that 50-50 match rate from EDA. Red, all the way kind of our darkest color, is you're eligible for that 80-20 match according to your unemployment and per capita income levels. So as kind of putting on my previous life hat, something that used to really frustrate me was doing these calculations by hand or trying to find them somewhere on the internet. We tried to make it as cut and dry for people as possible. So This is my personal, right? This speaks to a frustration that I personally have had in the past. So this is my favorite section of the NERDE. So we'll take a little bit of a pause. If anyone has questions at this point, we're in a little bit of a break because we're going to transition over to the technical demonstration. So feel free to yell. Seeing no screaming, I'm actually just going to head to the NERDE site. So feel free to play along on your screen at home. If you go to nerde.anl.gov, that's nerd with an E at the end, we can kind of all be here together. You'll see our homepage very quickly. This new to NERDE button will take you through our user guide, describing each of the spaces within the NERDE, describing what kind of data exists and our relationship with the Economic Development Administration, how it started and where we foresee it going. You'll also see these hexagons. These are, again, just like little things that I love about the site. We spent a lot of, I'm not a designer, but we spent a lot of time on the design. Hexagons are a very resilient geometric shape, and so we kind of leaned into that for the NERDE throughout. So you'll see this common theme of hexagons throughout the site. If you go over, we'll actually start with some of our opportunity explorers. So as I mentioned, the distress statistics generator is my favorite of our tools, but we also have our other opportunity spaces in here. We worked really closely with EDA on the Recompete grant program as well. So some of you may be familiar with the Recompete dashboard. This was an eligibility map for the grant itself. So as people put their grant applications together, they could check eligibility for their region. The Recompete grants were actually just announced. So we're hoping that they add a little bit more money to that program and restart it again so that this continues to be a relevant space. This also is where our Economic Development Capacity Index page lives. So the EDCI takes you off into another space. We'll start with, actually, we're going to start in a different place. I hate to just send us all around here, but we'll do a little bit of a tour of the site. So that's our Opportunity Explorer space. Our next space is for tools and applications. So as I mentioned, this is where you can pull a one-off area fact sheet, or you can visit our Data Explorer. So we'll get started here. Within the Data Explorer, you'll kind of be faced with this first page. Our default county, this actually was an internal conversation recently, is Appling County, Georgia. This is just the product of a miscommunication between our head geospatial engineer and our web developer. We were going to start with Autauga County, Alabama, which is first in the FIPS codes, first in terms of alphabetical order, but Alabama being right next to Georgia, Appling sounding, it got a little complicated. So unless you're particularly interested in Appling County, Georgia, you can hit this map icon and it'll allow you to select different geographic areas. You can select a geography by state, by county, by economic development district, or by census tract. This gives you different levels of data. I think it can be really helpful because a lot of dashboards that we know of don't provide data by census tract, so we can get really deep into some of these questions. For this demonstration, I'll focus on economic development districts or planning districts because it's a kind of quick snapshot of what is going on within a region. Economic development districts require a lot of this data in order to put their comprehensive economic development strategies together, in order to build kind of robust networked grant applications. Again, very focused on the Economic Development Administration in the design of this tool. So it was a very very intentional kind of EDD support tool. So I'm going to choose the Cumberland Valley Economic Development District for this example, and we'll go through the data that is provided. So as you can see, it loaded up all of our FIPS codes for each of the counties within this economic development district. A quick way to get your fact sheets without going all the way back to our tools and applications page is if you go to this area fact sheets, you can download one for each of the counties that you've selected. So here's an example of Bell County, Kentucky. As you can see, we're in the Cumberland Valley Area Development District. You've got a nice little snapshot of where that is within the state quickly, some demographic information, some workforce and industry information. I'll make this a little bigger so people don't have to put on their reading glasses in order to see it. Our EDCI category percentile. So as I mentioned, the Economic Development Capacity Index buckets 53 indicators into these 5 categories. So you can see where your county kind of stands out in terms of representation around the United States versus where you might want to spend a little bit more time and energy. So if we go back here, we have a lot of data, right? And we really tried to design the NERDE site along the narrative of putting a grant application together. So we start out with EDA designated special needs indicators, things around high concentrations of coal jobs, persistent poverty. Yeah, let's just make this a little bigger so we're not, I got my glasses on this morning. I don't know if everybody else does. Other things that we really focused on are economic distress indicators. So looking at changes in employment over time, this arrow will show that kind of point in time estimate of 24-month unemployment compared to that same percentage a year ago. So how are you doing in terms of are you rising in unemployment? Are you falling in unemployment? How are things going within your community? Again, we can kind of see over time indicators. We can look at industrial value to GDP. We can look at kind of specific spaces for each of the counties and their industrial makeup. As we continue to go through, we also have a section on tribal reservations that doesn't apply for this area of selection, but may apply for other communities. We have a section that really focuses on the Economic Development Capacity Index and links to the EDCI portal. This really starts to build that narrative of, okay, we've given you a bunch of data. There's a bunch of things that are going on in your community. What does that mean for you, right? Where does your area stand out? Clay County has a lot of people who live really close to a park. We have a high number of workforce training establishments in Bell County. These things, while they start conversations, while they're good to kind of be food for the structure for a grant application or be food for the structure for an emergency management plan, we really invite you to dive into that data and say, does this reflect my reality, right? If you live in Bell County and you've never heard of a workforce training program, we invite you to A, do some research, and then B, reach out to us if that doesn't seem quite right. A lot of our data is publicly sourced from the federal government, which has kind of a gold standard of data quality rigor, but everything is fallible, especially for more rural areas, especially for areas that have kind of a lower data quality index for a whole bunch of reasons. And we're really dedicated to making sure that our data is as reality checked as possible. So as you go through the NERDE, as you go through the data that we have within the space, we invite you to have a really critical lens on what we're saying about your community, and feel free to kind of reach back out to us. You're welcome to email me. At the end of this presentation, I'll give you the full kind of contact information email for our office. We also have a contact page on the site. So if anything starts to seem a little bit wrong, let us know. Again, a lot of this data we're not the first to publish it. So it may look a little bit repetitive, but there are a lot of spaces to go through and start to say, okay, what does the snapshot of my community or region look like from this perspective? As we go through, I'll just kind of, without trying to give anyone whiplash or make anyone motion sick, I will just kind of go through each of the sections pretty quickly. So we've got a section on housing and infrastructure, looking at kind of mortgage and rental distributions throughout the region. We have information on transportation and commuters. This can be really helpful for smaller counties where the majority of your population is going to an urban center daily for work. That can be really important when understanding transportation pipelines and the populations that may be most affected or least affected by having to relocate. We have information on internet access. This uses an in-house calculated index on internet access. So a little bit of information on it. So the Internet Access Index brings together a lot of different information from the federal government, from the private sector, to really create as robust of an internet access index as we could. We know that there are some holes in the internet data space, and we tried to fill those as much as we could as we looked at this portion. As I mentioned before, the recent recompete grant was really focused on labor force participation rate. I foresee that to be a pretty common metric that's used in the future, is how many people within your space are participating in the labor force, and how can we start to plan around that. This section on workforce really describes a lot of that. So gives you the summary, gives you some information, quick information about your labor force. As I mentioned before, our local economy section is where you find those performance indices for government revenue. So if you take this and you move the slider here around, we can go to January 1st, 2020, which is a key baseline for COVID work. And we can see some of the impacts of COVID to both state and local government revenue and to our county or kind of regional space. As you can see, Kentucky tracked pretty well to the rest of the United States. Please ignore this big dip at the end. This is we have a tendency to have a little bit of a data blip in our closest time period because of the calculation. So as you're looking at this, or as you're taking any of this data or information, again, either tell us that it's wrong or kind of take it with a grain of salt. Each of these charts, this is a good segue to say each of these charts can be downloaded either as an image, or the raw data can be downloaded as a CSV or Excel sheet so that you can easily put it into presentations, reports. You can do some editing on your own and kind of infuse some of the data that you find really impactful or important into the charts themselves. Again, we see the area here, so our economic development district tracking really well to the rest of the United States for impact from COVID. Industry clusters, we have information on location quotient for jobs, for wages. There's a lot of data in here. I really invite you to kind of take a deep dive, take some time with it, and see how it might be used in your space. Where I'll spend some specific time today, because it really relates to the emergency management process, is our risk and resilience page. So for each of the counties, we can take a look at the National Risk Index. This is a FEMA indicator that we help to support in terms of what does your natural disaster risk level look like. It looks like for the majority of the counties in this selected area, we have pretty low natural disaster risk. I know that Kentucky is going through a period of some fires now, and so again, that'll be reflected in some of the FEMA declared disasters and some of the maps that we have later on in this section. We also have the Community Resilience Challenges Index. So As you can see, all of these things, especially where we use some jargon, have little orange question boxes. As you have questions on what things mean, we've just tried to describe each of these things pretty thoroughly throughout the site. If there's any place that you'd like a question box and you don't see one, again, more information is always better on our end. And so if there's anything that you're missing, we're happy to add some things around it. And then we also have information on the Gini coefficient or income inequality, which can be a really big factor for kind of the distribution of planning that you need to do, right? So making sure that everybody across the spectrum is being taken into account when we're looking at plans and when we're putting plans together. Again, FEMA declarations of disasters. So as I mentioned, you all have had some storms, you've had some fires. We did not include COVID within our FEMA disaster declarations because of the fact that it did affect the entirety of the United States and we didn't want to be too repetitive. As I mentioned before, we have our climate projections. So this really describes changes to mid-century. Mid-century is 2050. We're looking towards how our environment is proposed to change over that period of time. So we can see quite a bit of variation in terms of things like precipitation. We're going to get higher temperatures. I don't know if you all are summer people, but heat has been really affecting the United States. I know all of us have felt at least a little bit of that this summer. These are projections on how that is posed to continue throughout the next 25 years. And then our last section here in the risk and resilience space is some indices around dollar amounts of loss, right? So for each of these natural disasters, what's the general risk, right? So are we looking at very low risk? And if we have higher risk, what is the potential cost of a disaster like that to the area? This can be really, really helpful when it comes to what should we be concerned about as a region. Another really helpful thing in this map is that you get to see some comparisons for the full state. So as you can see, Jefferson County has a pretty high risk rating, high areas of tornado risk, high lightning risk. These are things to keep in mind. Bryson, I love your comment on future trainings. I'm happy to provide any trainings to your organization or your agency. This will also be recorded. So if you'd like to kind of come back and watch it again, you're welcome to do so. We also have a recording of our initial NERDE training on this site. So I'll show you how to get there in a minute. So I'm going to try to get us back to the top without making anybody motion sick. Sorry. Again, this top area, while unassuming, has a lot of really cool stuff. We looked at our area fact sheets. This second button takes us to the distress statistics generator. So as I mentioned before, the DSG is a really great place to learn about your grant eligibility for EDA. If you go there straight from the Data Explorer, it already loads up all of your selected counties. That's why I did this training the way that I did. That's why we started within the data space, is because that's my easiest way to load up all of these counties really effectively. We can also choose those within the map. So this is an interactive map where you can select different counties, you can pick them by state and county, and really get your area together. So now that we have all of these loaded up in the easy way, we're going to view our distress statistics for this area. In addition to the stats, which we love, we also have some kind of qualitative information about what you may need to know about the counties within your area. This specifically looks at economic development administration resources. So what are the districts in the selection that you have? What are the EDA regional offices that should be on your mind as you go through all of this information? Again, we've got some great color coding here. This is, for me, while Alicia was very kind in saying, you know, statistics hero, I'm also a human being that like has a lot to do, and numbers have a tendency to go in one eye and out the other, while colors don't. So really saying, okay, these are our key counties here: Clay, Harlan, Jackson, and Knox, where we have low per capita income, and we can really start to diversify our industry base. We can apply for some grants, and we can really hit this area hard. Any questions before we head into some of the resource centers in the site? I'm going to check the chat really quick. Yeah, okay. Great questions on Esri integration. So as I mentioned, our geospatial engineer is very involved in this project. She is an Esri wizard, as happens for those types of people. I'll take you through some of the background data that we do provide, and show you kind of where my best practices in integrating this data to your spaces is. So if we go back to our tools and applications kind of header here, we'll see the area fact sheet, which we know about, the data explorer, which we know about, a data download space. So this will actually give you the raw CSV file of all of the data that exists within the NERDE. That can be pretty overwhelming, because it does provide every county within the United States. This is something that can be a little bit jarring, but is a really good resource, right? So something that you may be able to download within your space every once in a while, keep on file, and use time and time again. Our next area is our REST API. So this is pretty new. And for those of you who are at a higher technology level or building your own dashboards or have an in-house tech wizard, this is a really good space to have, right? So all of our data is available via our API. You can tap in to our data pipeline, and you can feed this data directly to your own dashboards, to your own reports, and integrate that with any in-house data or local data that you may have available. Something that I find really useful about the REST API is that you can start to blend those pieces of information. And when it comes to regular reports, so whether that be disaster recovery reports or it be kind of political reports that are required by government officials, whether it be annual updates to your comprehensive economic development strategy, this can really smooth that pipeline for data really easily if you have the kind of technical chops to use it. Okay, so that's kind of the heavy data side. Again, we really tried to be as mindful of each of our technical capacities as possible. We know that there are some offices that are doing some crazy stuff that exceeds even my ability at this point, but we have a really great team of really smart people to get this going. But we also understand that there are a lot of days where you're just tired and you want quick data quickly. I'll take you now into our resource center. So here is our user guide. When I got us to the first page, our landing page, this is where it takes you. As I mentioned, we have our initial webinar and training freely available on this site. We really go through each of the three big data spaces on this site as well. So if you have any questions, this is always a good place to come back to answer some of those. We also have a page here for our events and webinars. This is a little stale. Obviously, this save the date is several months ago. We will update this and just kind of send people to the recording. But when we do have upcoming webinars, for example, about some of our research briefs that we put out, we will list these within the event space. Next is our research hub. I mentioned that we work really closely with a lot of other organizations, both within Argonne and outside of Argonne. So we try to make sure that you have access to that as much as we do. That's within our research component space. So here we list out all of our partners, for example, the Climate Risk and Resilience tool, and also the WRAPT tool, which we have developed alongside with FEMA, which provides a lot of this data. But to Brent's point, or to Bryson's point about integrating with geospatial tools and with mapping, WRAPT is a really good place to pull in a lot of that data from a map perspective. NERDE focuses more on the writing of things, the putting together proposals. WRAPT really focuses on the geospatial space. Other trusted organizations and resources. This is a list of folks that we work really closely with. This is essentially my magazine of Alison's bookmarks. Pretty much. This is pretty much my bookmarked data spaces. Brookings Metro Monitor does a great job of providing really hands-on tools for metro spaces. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis does a really good job providing data for tribal communities. So in the spaces that we may not spend the majority of our focus, we do work really closely alongside researchers who do support those spaces. We also have a nice page of our indices and methodologies. If you have any questions about how we calculate things, this is a great place to go to read up on some math papers and get your hands dirty with some of the research that we're doing. And then last but not least, in our About section, you can read about who the National Economic Research and Resilience Center is, what we do, about the tool. You can also go to our contact page. So if you have any questions or issues with the site, we invite you to write those out, to kind of get in contact with us. We also have an email address. It's nerc@anl.gov. I'll add that in the chat once we kind of break out of the presentation mode. So that leaves us about 18 minutes for questions. I hope that's enough time, but I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Alicia for some final comments, and we'll get to question time.
Okay, Alison, before I pull up my slides really fast, I do want to make sure that we know how to get back to the REST API, because Bryson did ask that. Bryson, there will be a recording, so you should be able to figure it out from the actual screen share, but Alison, if you want to just quickly mention that while I pull up the tool.
Yes, so I'll put the link to the REST API in the chat. We're actually, as I speak, in the back of my Zoom screen, I also have an email open with one of our programmers. We're providing both R and Python examples to access the API. To access the API, if R or Python are not your most commonly used programming languages, again, let us know. We're working really closely with EDA, who uses Power BI. We're trying to put together some examples of using API calls in Excel spreadsheets. So we're trying to be as kind of universal as possible for API endpoint usage.
Great, thank you. And then there's also one other question that came up, and I think you sort of touched on this, but maybe you want to give a more direct answer. Eric asks about how many different entities and other organizations have used NERDE so far in real time. And what did they use it for? What were their reactions?
I think that's a great question. So while I wish I had a robust answer to that, I don't. We do. So there are a few ways that I can answer that. I know that we have people who access the NERDE site from across the country. So we keep track of statistics on who's kind of tapping into our website, how many visitors we get in a certain day, so on and so forth. I also know that the state of Colorado, for their comprehensive economic development strategy, used a lot of the nerdy data to get those conversations started, to kind of rally community members around certain components of their action plan. We have an example of a Northern Colorado comprehensive economic development strategy, which used a lot of the data throughout their narrative. But aside from these kind of one-off anecdotes that I get, whether it's in presentations like this or it's at conferences that I present at, it's hard for us to really grasp the full impact of the NERDE itself on the space. In addition to this conversation, we also held a economic resilience forum at Argonne National Labs this last spring, where we brought people together to talk about issues of economic development, to really get hands-on in terms of data, in terms of use for the National Economic Resilience Data Explorer and the NERDE. So we're trying our best to make it as useful as possible, but having those tangible results is something that we're still building over time.
Thanks, Alison. And then David asked a question earlier on about, or he made a comment about kind of going through the process as you were showing it on his own screen, and he noticed that the ranking for the state for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, excuse me, is 4th in the United States. Does that sound about right?
You know, I probably, so again, some background on me. My world is economics, right? And so when it comes to natural disaster risk, I care, but I'm not the expert on our team. I would be surprised if Kentucky was 4th, considering my understanding of the geography, but I'm surprised all the time. So we'll take a look at it. And David, I'd love to kind of chat through what that looks like in terms of reality. Again, we're really trying to jive data and reality together as best we can, and I think these are the spaces that we do that best.
Great. Maybe that's a piece of trivia we can include when we post a link to this recording.
Oh my God, I think that you guys should probably start ending these trainings with a trivia question.
Yeah, free registration for the next webinar. And David loves trivia. Why does that not surprise me about David? Any other questions from the group that were not already in the chat? Okay, I think I've held the silence long enough just to give everyone ample opportunity to speak. Alison, we really appreciate your time and coming on and your effort in this process. As we've mentioned already, we'll kind of wrap up here. We've got a few places where you can talk to David, send him an email, give him a call. If you have comments or suggestions on next webinars, or maybe if you'd like to have Alison back and dive a little bit more into the NERDE tool. Also, Alison just listed her email as well. If you want to talk directly to her about NERDE, or you've got specific questions, or you notice something that is needs to be fixed on the platform. As we mentioned already, all of these webinars are recorded. They are archived on YouTube at the @PrepareKY CSEPP/videos link, and that'll be posted later on. Of course, we know they occur the 3rd Wednesday of each month at noon Eastern Time. We have the registration set up there. Future topics include September 18th, field PIOs ready for the call, how to deploy, integrate, and demobilize, as well as October 16th, which is the KQS Kentucky qualification system for PIOs. We hope that you'll be able to join us for both the September 18th and October 16th piece of information. Our event on the 18th of September will be with Wade Matthews, who is currently the Utah Division of Emergency Management Public Information Officer, and also a former CSEPP employee with Tooele County. And registration is currently open. for the PIO Public Information Basics L105 class, which is September 23rd through 25th in Marshall County. And as a prereq, you will have to have IS 29A. So you need to submit that particular certificate in order to register for the L105. And then, of course, we have the October webinar, as we mentioned, Dr. Charles K. Harris, who works currently with Kentucky Division of Emergency Management. He will be presenting on the Kentucky qualification system for PIOs. And then we have another L105 class in Prestonsburg, October 29th through 31st. Again, that IS 29A certificate must be submitted when you register. And there will be no webinar in December. So we will see everyone in January after everybody returns from the holiday break. Those are all the announcements. I'm not sure if David is still on, but if he is and he wants to say something quick, that's totally fine. Otherwise, we look forward to having you at our next webinar in August.